Black twins threatened by racist bullies, unaware they are black belt fighters. How would you react if the world saw you as an outsider simply because of the color of your skin? That was the question Kayla and Kiana Bennett, twin sisters, were forced to confront the moment they stepped into a school known as the elite sanctuary of America, Hawthorne Ridge Preparatory School. Nestled in the lush suburbs of Greenhaven, Connecticut, Hawthorne Ridge was the dream of thousands of students across the country. Cobblestone paths wound their way between ivy-covered walls that had stood for centuries. Dark red roof tiles, custom-designed uniforms, Ivy League-certified faculty. Everything about the school exuded upper-class prestige. But that dream carried a bitter truth. This place had never been kind to those who were different. Kayla and Kiana didn't get there the easy way. Two black girls born into a working-class family, they were admitted on a prestigious academic scholarship and an unusual achievement. Third-degree black belts in karate, trained directly by their father, Marcus Bennett, a former U.S. Marine, now a martial arts instructor at the local community center. From the very first moment, the sisters drew attention, not because of their accolades or warm smiles, but because they existed. In a school where most students bore last names like Whitmore, Callahan, or Ferris, names tied to local dynasties of wealth, Kayla and Kiana's presence was like a dissonant note in a classical symphony. From the moment they walked through the school gates, they were scrutinized. Every glance felt like a tiny knife, cold, silent, yet sharp enough to cut deep. But Kayla, with her sharp wit and eyes that seemed to read minds, merely curled her lips into a faint smirk. Kiana, calm and resilient, gripped her backpack strap like it was a declaration. "I will not back down." Among those who looked at them with the most disdain, one name stood out: Chase Whitmore. Son of Heather and Douglas Whitmore, the couple who had donated over $2 million for the school's new athletic center. Chase didn't need to try. He was already worshipped like royalty. Tall, blonde, perfect smile, star of the football team. Yet behind the polished facade lay a mind steeped in entitlement and arrogance, nurtured by generations of privilege. And the moment he saw Kayla and Kiana walk into the main hall on their first day, Chase smirked, not in welcome, but in contempt, laced with the perverse excitement of someone spotting new prey. Kayla and Kiana had no idea they had just stepped into a battlefield where pride, unspoken hatred, and prejudice could be far more dangerous than any punch. But what Chase and others, like him, failed to realize was that the girls were far from fragile. Behind those calm smiles were nerves of steel, forged through years of brutal training with a father who never went easy on them. Mornings that began before dawn in the dead of winter. Bruises that told a childhood story few could understand. Marcus Bennett, their father, their teacher, their greatest inspiration, had once told them, "The world won't always be fair to you, but martial arts doesn't just teach you how to fight back. It teaches you when to stand, and why." That first morning ended with piercing stares, a few sneering whispers behind their backs, and a casual collision with Troy Callahan, Chase's hulking best friend, that sent Kiana's books sprawling across the floor. But instead of reacting, Kiana quietly picked them up, without a single word of complaint. Kayla, on the other hand, stood still, her gaze locked on Troy. So cold, it made him falter for just a second. The first day ended under a suffocating cloud, but deep within Kayla and Kiana, a silent vow had been made. We won't let them decide who we are. They had yet to know. The real storm was still ahead. And when things spun out of control, when cruelty crossed the line from words to something darker, those who had scorned them would come face to face with a lesson, taught through precise kicks, unbreakable pride, and a truth they never could have imagined. There's no room for the different here. That sentence wasn't written on any of Hawthorne Ridge's official rule boards, but it echoed through the marble hallways like an unspoken law, passed down from class to class, from one glance to another smirk. Kayla and Kiana already knew that life at this school wouldn't be easy, but they hadn't expected the dirty tricks to come so soon, and to be so calculated. Their second day at Hawthorne Ridge began like any other, or at least, that's what they thought. But when they walked into their American history class, they discovered their desks had been defaced with a permanent marker. Go back to the ghetto. Not your kind. You'll never belong here. No one took responsibility. Every gaze darted away, but the soft snickers from the back were clearer than ever. Chase Whitmore lounged with both hands behind his head, eyes locked on Kayla as he winked mockingly. His two lackeys, Troy Callahan and Blake Ferris, made no effort to hide their amusement. Kiana clenched her fists, lips tight, but said nothing. Kayla, instead of reacting, quietly pulled a cloth from her backpack and began wiping the words away, stroke by stroke, as if erasing an entire generation's prejudice with her resilience alone. The teacher walked in, saw the scene, frowned briefly, then said nothing. No words were spoken. No apology offered. No action taken. The silence of adults is sometimes a form of complicity. After class, things got worse in the lunchroom. The sisters carried their trays to an empty table, but just as they set them down, a blonde girl strutted over, crossed her legs, and announced loudly, "This seat is ours." Without waiting for a response, 3 other white girls pulled out chairs, jostled the twins, and knocked Kiana's tray to the floor. Hot soup splattered across her uniform skirt. A long silence followed. The entire cafeteria turned to look. A few chuckles rang out, but not a single person stood up. Kiana dropped to her knees, picking up scattered bits of food. Kayla knelt beside her. They didn't cry. They just looked at each other, a silent nod, as if winding up for something far greater. At that moment, Chase entered the cafeteria with Troy and Blake. He whistled. Well. Did the janitorial team arrive early? Laughter rippled through the room, but Kayla stood up, eyes locked on him, for the first time, no longer avoiding, no longer silent. "You can laugh all you want, Chase," she said calmly, each word deliberate. "But you will never make me feel small, unless I let you." The smile on Chase's face faltered, just for a moment. From that day on, Kayla and Kiana became the prime targets in every game Chase's group devised. Pens and books were shredded. Their lockers were broken into and trashed. In one PE class, Blake accidentally slipped and pushed Kiana onto the hard court, scraping her knee until it bled. The gym teacher, Coach Danvers, only sighed and told Kiana to be more careful next time. At the first parent-teacher conference, Marcus Bennett was summoned because his daughters had disrupted the class, a vague accusation. When he asked to review the security footage, the school replied, nothing unusual was found. But Marcus, a former Marine, knew what silence could conceal. He didn't get angry. He simply looked at his daughters that evening and said, "You can choose the easy path or the right one. But if you choose the right one, don't ever back down." Kiana began quietly documenting everything they went through, each incident, each name, each time. Kayla, after every class, led her sister to the park behind the school, to a quiet, hidden corner. They trained, silently, steadily, move after move, as if preparing for a day when silence would no longer be enough. And that day, that night, was drawing near. People often mistake silence for weakness, but sometimes silence is what makes the world tremble. Kayla and Kiana Bennett were living each day under the shadow of discrimination, but they were not afraid. They chose to endure not out of fear, but because they knew that sometimes the strongest person is the one who knows when to wait. After days of scorn and pain, the twins began to wear a mask. They still smiled, still sat in the front row of every class, still answered every question fluently, still helped their desk mates review before tests. No one knew that behind that calm exterior were sleepless nights, ice packs pressed against bruises, and stifled sighs no adult ever heard. Even when Kayla discovered a clean slash across the back of her coat, likely made with a box cutter, she simply tucked it into her desk and wore her sister's hoodie instead. Kiana was once locked inside the gym after school by someone who had, accidentally, shut the door. When the hall monitor found her 3 hours later, dust had settled on her shoulders, but her eyes still shone bright. No tears, no complaints, just a silent stare into nothing, as if whispering a vow no one could hear. Those who witnessed it from afar, even if they understood, could only remain silent. At Hawthorne Ridge, the Whitmore family's power was practically law. Heather and Douglas Whitmore were the school's biggest donors, and Chase knew that better than anyone. He didn't need to hide his spite. He believed he was untouchable. Once, during a chemistry lab, Chase intentionally nudged a bubbling test tube toward Kayla's table. The liquid spilled, splashing onto her uniform sleeve. Though it didn't burn, it ruined the fabric entirely. When the teacher approached, Chase shrugged. Guess her hands were just clumsy. And the teacher only shook his head, then walked away. But amidst those dark days, there were small glimmers of light. One afternoon, as rain poured down outside, Kiana sat alone in the library when Ms. Emma, the elderly librarian with snow-white hair, gently placed a book on her table. The Journey of a Warrior. When Kiana looked up, Ms. Emma gave a soft smile. Not everyone is blind, sweetheart. Some people are just waiting for the right moment to stand on the side of justice. And she was right. That moment was drawing near. The more they endured, the more Kayla and Kiana realized. Their silence was being mistaken for acceptance. One night, after coming home from tutoring, their father, Marcus, noticed a large bruise on Kiana's upper arm. She quickly lied, saying she had tripped on the stairs. But he said nothing. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and walked into the living room. Within 30 minutes, he had set up a whiteboard, rolled out a mat on the hardwood floor, and placed 2 pairs of martial arts gloves on the table. He said nothing, but his eyes said everything. Starting tomorrow, he said, you won't just train to fight. You'll train to endure and to end this. From that day forward, every morning before sunrise, Kayla and Kiana trained with their father, not for revenge, but to rebuild their crushed self-worth. They didn't speak of Chase. They didn't mention Blake or Troy. But every punch, every kick, seemed to strip away one invisible blade lodged in their pride. They learned how to balance after being pushed down, learned how to fall without getting hurt, learned how to slow their breath when their hearts pounded with rage, learned how to master their fury, so that when the time came, it would become their sharpest weapon. Meanwhile, at school, Chase grew increasingly impatient. He couldn't understand why those disgusting girls still held their heads high, still topped every class, still hadn't run away. They need to be taught a real lesson, he muttered to Troy and Blake one rainy afternoon, as the three stood by the parking lot. A lesson they'll never forget. The plan began to take shape. A trap after school, where there'd be no teachers, no cameras, no witnesses. Or at least, that's what Chase believed. Chase scheduled a meeting with the twins to make peace. The practice field after school. Could be interesting. No one said it out loud, but everyone whispered. The news spread like smoke, colorless, scentless, but undoubtedly trailing fire. That afternoon, Kayla and Kiana Bennett stood side by side in a quiet hallway, silently staring at the message on their phone from Chase Whitmore. Truce. 4 p.m. backfield. No one needs to know. Kiana frowned. Trap. Kayla nodded. Definitely. But they still went. Not because they were naive, but because they were tired of running. Because sometimes you have to step into the storm to end it. 4:01 p.m. The field behind the gym building was nearly abandoned. The old practice ground for the football team, left to decay due to budget cuts. Now it was a gray zone, beyond the reach of cameras, a place where bad things could happen and no one would know. Chase stood waiting, arms crossed, wearing smoky sunglasses like some young executive about to close a deal. Behind him stood Troy Callahan and Blake Ferris, each posted at a corner, hands in their pockets, looking like they were posing for a photo shoot in Rich Boys Monthly. "Oh, they're here," Chase said, clapping twice like an actor stepping onto a stage. The Bennett sisters, scholarship legends, symbols of virtue. Welcome. Kayla didn't smile. Say what you need to say. Why did you invite us here? Oh, it's a small matter. Chase stepped closer, close enough for his breath to hit her face. I want to re-establish order. Around here, people like you, black, poor, on scholarship, should know your place. And you two seem to have forgotten that. He smiled, then suddenly spun around and signaled with his hand. Show them lesson number 1. Troy charged forward, massive, like a linebacker, rushing Kiana like a bull. But in a split second, Kiana pivoted, pulled his arm with his momentum, swept his legs, and dropped her center of gravity. Troy crashed face first onto the concrete, his head slamming against an old wall, cursing, "What the hell?" Blake hadn't even moved when Kayla was already on him. Her left hand blocked his punch, her right twisted his wrist, and flipped him onto his back like a choreographed move from a martial arts kata. Chase stepped back, eyes wide. What are you? Who are you? Kayla bent down, pulled a black karate belt from her backpack, and tossed it at his feet. We're the people you should have thought twice about messing with. Blake tried to stand again, hands trembling, but Kiana stepped forward, calmly delivered a precise kick to the side of his knee, and dropped him like a sack of cement. Troy lay gasping for breath, reaching toward Chase. Help me. Please. But Chase didn't move. He was frozen. What terrified him wasn't the strikes. It was that everything he'd believed was power, money, status, fear of the weak, was unraveling right before his eyes. Kayla stepped closer, her gaze calm like a still lake. We didn't want to fight, but we weren't born to be oppressed. Kiana stood beside her, adding, our silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice. And today, we choose to speak. Footsteps began echoing in the distance, students arriving, faces filled with anticipation. Some were filming, some were live streaming. Some just stood, staring at the 3 defeated boys. Chase screamed in rage. You'll regret this. I'll sue. I'll call my parents, the board, my lawyers, everyone. You'll be expelled. But then, a student cautiously stepped forward. Liam Cho, a member of the robotics club. He held up a small USB stick. I have 4 different camera angles from the hidden cams I installed here for my science project. The whole truce meeting was recorded. including the part where Chase said, "Teach them a lesson." No one said a word. Chase's face drained of color. Troy moaned on the ground. Blake tried to crawl away. And in the center of the field stood two black girls, once ridiculed, once threatened, now standing tall, like monuments to an undeniable truth. They were no longer scholarship students. They were warriors. Chase Whitmore stood frozen, as if turned to stone. His face, once full of arrogance and mockery, was now pale, fists clenched, breath heavy. The threats he had just uttered seemed to turn against him. The small USB in Liam Cho's hand was like a ticking time bomb. "What did you say?" Chase stammered, eyes locked on the device held by the quiet student no one had paid attention to all semester. 4 camera angles, clear audio. The entire truce meeting was recorded, every part of it. You, Troy, and Blake. "Nothing missing," Liam replied calmly. "If you try to blame Kayla or Kiana, I'll hand this footage straight to the administration. And if they don't act, I'll send it to my mom. She's a civil rights attorney." The crowd around them seemed to hold its breath. No one had expected the skinny, library-bound student to deliver the most unexpected knockout. Chase said nothing, only turned to look at Troy and Blake, both still sprawled on the ground, groaning in pain, unable to get up. He knew then that everything had spiraled beyond his control. Meanwhile, Kayla and Kiana stood in silence, their eyes watching every move, not with triumph, but with contemplation. Was this the end, or merely the beginning of a bigger battle? Because they knew well, a public fight didn't always win the hidden war. Just then, a voice called out from beyond the crowd. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned. It was Vice Principal Lawson, accompanied by Officer Raymond Cole, the man known throughout Greenhaven as firm and fair. They had received an anonymous report, no one knew from whom, but it was likely a student who had witnessed the events from afar. A heavy silence blanketed the field like thick fog. Vice Principal Lawson stepped forward, surveying the students with phones out, the beaten boys on the ground, and finally stopping at Kayla and Kiana. "Is someone going to explain what happened here?" No one answered. But once again, Liam stepped forward. "Sir, if you need evidence, I have video from the hidden camera equipment I used for my robotics project. Everything was recorded." Mr. Lawson turned to Officer Cole. "You'll need a copy immediately." Raymond Cole, a former SWAT officer now serving as a community officer, nodded. "I'll need to review the full content. If this was a premeditated act of bullying that escalated into violence, there may be legal consequences." Shortly after, Chase, Troy, and Blake were taken to the infirmary, while Kayla and Kiana were invited to the main office to submit written reports. But this time, they didn't walk in feeling punished. They walked in like warriors, stepping off the battlefield with their heads held high. Principal Graves's office, once a symbol of authority and discipline, witnessed a conversation no one had anticipated. "Kiana Bennett," Mr. Graves said in a calm voice, "I've never met students quite like you two. I've read your records. But today, I saw something that can't be captured on paper. Courage and control." "We didn't want to fight, sir," Kayla replied. "We just didn't want to keep living in fear." Mr. Graves stared out the window for a long moment before saying, "Liam's footage makes everything clear. Chase and his friends will be suspended indefinitely. We'll also work with their parents and pursue legal action if necessary." "What about us?" Kiana asked, unable to hide her concern. "You will be protected. And more than that, I believe your story will bring change." Not long after, the video clips of the confrontation spread rapidly across student forums, not in the way Chase had once hoped. Instead of humiliating Kayla and Kiana, the footage became a symbol of standing up against injustice. The first post was titled, "Two Scholarship Sisters Did What No One Else Dared. They Defeated Fear." Within 24 hours, the video reached over 500,000 views on the statewide student social media platform. The comments overflowed with praise, admiration, and even shame from those who had previously sided with Chase. Heather and Douglas Whitmore, Chase's parents, attempted to push back. They hired lawyers, threatened counter lawsuits for physical injury. But the clear evidence, the overwhelming support from the community, and the school's transparent policies made it impossible for them to bury the truth. More notably, Kayla and Kiana's father, Marcus Bennett, a former U.S. Marine, sent an open letter to the school board and the entire student body. In it, he wrote, "My daughters don't practice martial arts to fight. They practice to master restraint, to know when to stand up for themselves. And today, I'm proud not just of their skill, but of their courage in a world that too often does not welcome people like us." That letter went just as viral as the original video. Other parents, even white parents, began to ask, "Has my child ever contributed, intentionally or not, to a toxic culture?" Within that same week, the school board issued a new statement. The formation of an internal anti-discrimination committee, the launch of privilege and bias awareness workshops, increased supervision in areas without cameras, and the integration of martial arts into extracurricular programs as a means to build confidence and self-control. The video of Kayla and Kiana Bennett, from an anonymous camera angle in the backfield, had now become a phenomenon. Within 48 hours, the clip was reposted on TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, and spread across parent groups, student forums, and even made the front page of major educational blogs. Explosive headlines were everywhere. Two black girls face down a privileged bully and win. When scholarships come with black belts, a response that shattered prejudice. Chase Whitmore is no longer king of the school. Hawthorne Ridge, preparatory school, long known for its strict academic environment, had rarely attracted media attention. But this time was different. Reporters from Channel 12 Connecticut and the Greenhaven Voice began following the story, requesting interviews with witnesses and reaching out directly to the Bennett family. Marcus Bennett, father of Kayla and Kiana, made his first appearance on local television. Wearing his old military uniform with steady eyes, he spoke slowly. "I didn't raise my daughters to fight. I raised them to know their worth. And when cornered, they chose to stand, not back down." His words echoed through the studio like a sermon, and that was the moment the entire state began to view what seemed like a minor incident at a private high school through a completely different lens. Soon after, a wave of responses flooded Hawthorne Ridge. Over 2,000 emails arrived at the administration's inbox in just 3 days, from parents, alumni, former teachers, and even strangers with no direct connection. One alum, now a director of a scholarship foundation, wrote, "I once studied at Hawthorne. I, too, was laughed at for my skin color. This video brought me back to that moment. But this time, someone like me won." Principal Graves, a man of few words, was forced to hold an unscheduled press conference. At the briefing, he announced, Chase Whitmore and his group were suspended indefinitely. The school would establish an Integrity and Equity Council with student participation. A new Diversity Excellence Scholarship was funded by an anonymous alumnus with a donation of up to $1 million. However, not everyone was pleased. Heather and Douglas Whitmore, Chase's parents, reacted fiercely. They hired one of Connecticut's top legal teams and filed a countersuit against the school for failure to control campus violence and damage to family reputation. They even appeared on a conservative television channel, claiming Their son was dragged into a media storm over racial politics. Chase, in his only public statement, appeared in a self-justifying video. "I'm not racist. I just think not everyone should break tradition. Where did they come from? Why are they getting special treatment?" But those words only fueled the fire. Netizens pushed back with thousands of comments. The hashtag number #WeStandWithBennett spread across platforms, and even former supporters of Chase began falling silent. Meanwhile, Kayla and Kiana, at the center of the storm, continued going to class, showing up as usual. But the way others looked at them had changed. No longer were their peers scrutinizing them with suspicion, but with respect, a touch of awe, and more than anything, admiration. One day, as Kiana walked into her literature class, she found a short, handwritten note on her desk. "I used to laugh behind your back. I thought you didn't belong here. Now I realize you may belong here more than anyone. Emily H." The handwriting was messy, but the message was sincere. And it was just one of dozens of letters, cards, and messages tucked into their desks over the following week. But there was one more intervention, unexpected and profoundly meaningful. A few days after the story went viral, a black man in a gray suit walked into Principal Graves's office. His business card read, "Deputy Secretary Richard Langston, U.S. Department of Education." He wasn't there for the media, not for interviews, but to propose including Kayla and Kiana's story in the National Voices of Resilience Education Initiative, aimed at promoting awareness and dismantling prejudice in schools across the country. Principal Graves was stunned. "You mean our story will be in textbooks?" "Not just textbooks," Richard replied. "Also in teacher training materials, parent workshops, and national education programs." That evening, in the Bennett family's small living room, the four of them sat together. Marcus was at the computer, reading the confirmation email from the Department of Education. Kiana whispered, "I didn't think this would go this far." Kayla gently held her sister's hand. "But if our story can make even one child out there feel safer, then it's worth it." Marcus looked at his daughters, his eyes glowing with pride. His wife, Cheryl, quietly wiped away a tear and whispered, "We taught our girls to be strong, but they've taught us how to change the world." 1 month after what initially seemed like just another case of school bullying, Kayla and Kiana Bennett were no longer the new transfer students. Now they had become symbols, not just of courage, but of silent resistance, unwavering resolve, and the power rooted in one's true identity. The semester-end ceremony took place in the grand auditorium of Hawthorne Ridge Preparatory School, a hall once adorned solely with portraits of successful white alumni, now decorated with a new banner. Courage is contagious. Below it was an image of Kayla and Kiana, not in the midst of a fight, but standing tall, eyes calm, hands clasped like two peaceful warriors. Principal Graves stepped onto the stage amid the longest applause the school had ever seen. Some students leave a mark with grades, others with athletic wins. But very few, like Kayla and Kiana Bennett, carve a scar into the school's history and heal it with their own story. The entire hall rose to their feet, from classmates and teachers to even those who had once doubted them. Handshakes, hugs, and tearful parents blended into an atmosphere that felt profoundly solemn. After the ceremony, a young reporter from the Greenhaven Voice approached Kayla. "Do you think you've forgiven Chase?" Kayla looked at her, then answered softly, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means not letting hatred define my future." Kiana added, her eyes bright, "And we're going to use this story to help other kids never go through what we did." A few weeks later, Kayla and Kiana flew with their parents to Washington, D.C., to attend the National Youth Equity Summit, where they were invited as keynote speakers. They stood before hundreds of students from across America, kids who had been bullied, belittled, and silenced. Kiana, speaking before such a large crowd for the first time, spoke with a steady voice. "We were once silent, once endured, once doubted ourselves. But today, we share our story, so that those who are afraid know you are not alone." A nonprofit organization offered to fund the Bennett Sisters Scholarship Fund to support students of color pursuing education at elite private schools. Their father, Marcus, was invited to teach a course called Self-Defense and Self-Respect for at-risk student communities. Their story was also adapted into teaching materials at over 120 high schools nationwide as part of a national privilege and equity awareness program. And Chase Whitmore? He transferred schools. No farewell, no explanation. Those who had been close to him began to distance themselves. Heather and Douglas Whitmore, who once believed that money and influence could erase any scandal, now faced the loss of major sponsorships from anti-discrimination organizations. Their silence was the most belated apology of all. One autumn afternoon, as school let out, Kayla and Kiana stood on the steps in front of the school library, the place where it had all begun. A light breeze carried the distant laughter of kids playing ball. "Do you think if none of this had happened, we'd still be the same?" Kiana asked. Kayla smiled. "Maybe. But I like who we are now. Not because people know us, but because we know ourselves better than ever." The two sisters held hands, just like they did on their first day walking through the school gates. They were no longer outsiders. They were game changers. How many of us have ever been judged just because of our skin color, background, or appearance? And if you were in the same situation as Kayla and Kiana, would you choose to stay silent or to stand up? Today's story isn't just about injustice, but a reminder that true strength comes from courage and unwavering determination. What do you think about the way these two girls faced and overcame prejudice? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you found this story thought-provoking and believe it could inspire someone, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video to spread this positive message even further. Thank you for watching until the end. Your support is what motivates us to keep telling meaningful stories.